I'm not expecting a phone call, but I do want to know what time it is. There's not a clock on the back of the wall anymore to alert me, so I want to make sure that we're out of here before noon. It's good to see everyone that's chosen to be here during this snowy day. You know, as Dustin said a moment ago, it's time for some good news, right? And we have good news here. The good news shouldn't be that the doctor's report says you tested positive for COVID antibodies. Unfortunately, that was my good news this past week, is I've got the antibodies. Yes! That's a good Christmas gift for me. That means I'm somewhat invincible as it relates to COVID. I'm probably not really. But that's the good news. And we need more good news than that. And this time of year, as Dustin said, he wants to make Christmas a verb, right? He wants to get excited about it. And we are. We should be excited. In this story this morning, as we talk about these wise men, there's some good news here. You know, I've never heard the song we just sang during a worship service before. And I liked it. Thank you for leading that. I asked Mike if Mike would purchase the song. Mike Minson, he did, and he put it on there. And I like the song. There's a lot of there's some good value in that song. It talks about the gifts that were given and the meaning of those gifts that were given by the wise men. And Brother Mike asked me a while back. Mike makes oftentimes the curriculum assignments here, the study, and with good reason. You know, he knows what's a timely thing to talk about and a good thing to talk about. And Mike actually talked about this about 10 years ago here. But I think his study was called The Wise Men. He asked me to title this The Magi, which can be. I called it The Wise Men on this screen here. But you know, this time of year, a lot of us will be receiving Christmas cards, if you will, that may have this on the cover. Something like this, akin to this, right? And you know, it's often that we'll receive these cards from, I'll receive them from people who are related to me, maybe some kinfolks, maybe some distant relatives, but you know, people that, in my mind at least, are not the least bit connected in any way to Christ. They don't attend a worship service. I've never heard them speak about the Messiah, but they'll send these cards out like this, right? And so, I think it's a good time to talk about it while this is in the air, while people who maybe aren't people that we would consider connected or affiliated with Christianity, but yet they'll send these cards out. They may not know who John the Baptist or the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Peter are. They may not know who any of those people are, but they know about the three wise men. They know about these gentlemen that are mentioned only in 12 verses in Matthew the 2nd chapter that were read earlier. So maybe it's a good starting point to talk about this. And we'll talk about some things. You know, this morning I'm going to take a few historic liberties, if you will. I'm going to make some assumptions. This is a time of year when a lot of that's going on, isn't it? You know, I notice I keep getting peppered with emails about letters that you can get if you pay for them from Santa Claus. Right? And if you want to pay a premium, you can get certified letters from Santa Claus. It costs a little more to get certified letters from Santa Claus. I'm not going to take that type of liberty, hopefully, but I'll take some. We'll draw some comparisons and look at some history here to see if we can identify who these wise men are. And quite honestly, until I looked into this, I didn't think a whole lot about who these people were, who these men were. I talked to one of my children, my oldest child, she's probably watching at home today, about this. And I asked her, I said, what do you know about these wise men? They said, well, they're some way connected to some strange religion, and they saw something in the sky, and they started wandering about, following, chasing that star around, and they eventually arrived at Jesus. And you know, that's about what I thought about it. Didn't think a whole lot about it, but hopefully this morning we can take something from this story and we can utilize it during this season when this story is so prevalent, when the birth of Jesus is so prevalent and amongst us all the time. We're going to talk about the story that was read, and I'll go ahead and read this story again. We'll read this. This passage is found in Matthew, the 2nd chapter. And we're going to concentrate this morning mainly on the wise men Herod. We're going to talk about him also. We're going to talk about Christ, obviously. It says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, where is he who was born, or who has been born, King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Israel with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ had been born. So they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea. For thus it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a ruler, who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared, and he sent them from Bethlehem, or to Bethlehem, and said, go and search carefully for the young child. And when you have found him, bring back word to me that I may come and worship him also. When they heard the king, they departed. And behold, the star, which they had seen in the east, went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then being divinely warned in the dream, they said, then being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. It's a good reading, but it's the only reading in the New Testament where we find any talk of the wise men. Who are the wise men? Who are these people that came from the east? You know, the Bible would tell us that they came from the east. It says, for we have, as the passage reads here, for we have seen a star. Right? I always thought, or got the impression from this story, and as a child and watching cartoons about this event, or actually participating in pageants that they would used to have, believe it or not, in grade school. I think I was a wise man at one time. I know I was Santa Claus. But I'm pretty certain that I was a wise man at one time in a school production. They actually saw something in the sky. And I was always under the impression that they saw this star from a distant land in the east, and they followed that star all the way to Jerusalem. Matter of fact, I always was under the impression they followed the star all the way to Bethlehem. I don't think that's how it worked. I don't get that from the story here. They have seen, for we have seen his star, talking about the star, the Messiah star. We have seen his star in the east, and we have come to worship him. And they knew that whoever was born the King of the Jews, as the passage says here. We'll get into that as we go along here. Who were the wise men? You know, the Greek word for them is magos. I think magos is singular. Magi is the plural. Is of foreign origin and was a term used to describe a scientist of the Orient, or a scientist of that day, sometimes by implication a magician. That's where we get our word magic. It is translated in the New King James Version as sorcerer and wise men. Another Greek lexicon I looked at said, and this is taking, I think, some liberties here as they make this translation here, but they say the name given by the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, the Medes, Persians, and others to the wise men, teachers, priests, physicians, astrologers, seers, interpreters of dreams, augurs, soothsayers, sorcerers, etc. So we find that these people are mentioned in the Old Testament. We'll endeavor to study some of their history here in the Old Testament. You know, the region in which as you see the map here, the region in which we're talking about where these people may have came from is the purple area there. If you can read that, where it says Media, right below it is Babylonia. Then you can see Jerusalem. I guess I could point here, can I? Can't do it on this, so can I, Jonathan? They won't see Jerusalem's over here. Right? They're coming to Jerusalem. They started over here, looks to be in the east, somewhere over here. It says they saw the star in the east. Well, if they're in the east, how do they see the star in the east to go to Jerusalem? They would be looking westward, right? If the star was hovering over Jerusalem, one thing would be certain is that they would be looking toward the west. If they're over here in this part of the world, they would be looking westward to see a star. Even though I had an astronomy class in college, I didn't learn a whole lot, but I realized that not only does the sun rise in the east, but every other thing rises in the east too, to include the star, because the earth is tilting toward the east, or it's circling toward the east, or I'm going to say revolting. It's not revolting, it's turning toward the east. Right? So everything rises in the east. Another translation, I think the New Revised Standard Version says they saw the rising of his star. Not that they saw it rising in the east, but they saw the rising of his star. So I think it would tell us that when these people, and we'll put them in this location here in a few minutes, when they saw this part of the world, or when they saw this star, they didn't see it necessarily hovering over Jerusalem. They saw something in the sky that said, hey, it's time. It's time to do something. It's time to move, right? It's time to move. And we'll talk about that again here in a few moments too. Because they didn't see a star all the way in Jerusalem, because we're going to find out here in a minute that Herod had not even seen the star. You would think if this is an alignment of Jupiter and Saturn, where they're off a tenth of a degree and something's highlighting illuminating the whole sky, that everybody would be seeing this, right? But no, I think this is something that they detected because of their history as being a scientist or an astrologer. And I think astrologer may be too far of a step. I think they actually looked at the sky to kind of prophesy, so to speak. But I think they were also into astronomy, and they could see things that were different or distinct. And they saw something that would have been different or distinct, and they said, hey, it's time to move. It's time to do something. Where is he who is born King of the Jews? When they come to Jerusalem, it says, where is he that is born? So whatever they saw indicated to them that not only a king was born, but the King of the Jews was born. Well, where do you go when the King of the Jews were born? You go to Jerusalem, right? That's where the king's palace is. That's where you would go. Naturally, that's where you would go. For we have seen his star in the east. So again, we're starting way over here, and if you're keeping up with our Old Testament study, a lot of these things will make sense to you here. And we'll get into Daniel here in just a moment. But we have Jerusalem here. We have empires here that wind up being succeeded by another empire, Media and Persis, or which is Persia. This area right here is going to overtake Babylon. We know that Babylon takes people from Jerusalem and holds them captive in Babylon. The exiles, they go to the Babylonian Empire. They stay there. Daniel being one of the first ones, right? He's taken away. Eventually, they're succeeded by Media, or the Medes and Persians as we call them in the Old Testament. We have King Darius and King Cyrus. We read about those people in Daniel. We have King Nebuchadnezzar and his son, which were preceded those folks from Babylon, right? So we'll get into that here. We'll read a little bit about Daniel. Now, Ed Hopper talked a whole lot about Daniel, and I don't want to rehash a whole lot about what he did, but there's one thing in particular I do want to talk about Daniel, because I think the Bible is pretty clear that he had a big influence over these wise men 5 or 6 centuries prior to Jesus being born. So let's go to Daniel, the first chapter, and we'll read a few verses there. Daniel, the first chapter, verse 18 says, now at the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. So we have the temple being destroyed by the Babylonian Empire in Jerusalem. They're going to carry a lot of people off. Daniel and his buddies, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, we know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego by the Babylonian names, are being carried away. Because what? They're beautiful young men. They're really smart. They're people they're going to utilize in some fashion here in the king's court. It says, then the king interviewed those folks. And among them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah before they served before the king. Therefore, they served before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding, let me read here. I'm sorry, I'm getting off a little bit. I just realized I can read right here in front of me. Therefore, they served the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were all in his realm. He already had people in his realm. He had people that were astrologers and magicians who we're going to find out, were wise men. You know, back in the day, they consulted with people, these kings did, with people who would watch the stars, people who were into magic. You know, you can go back to the days of the Pharaoh in Egypt. You know, the people, when the plagues were coming upon the Egyptians there. You know, he would consult with magicians or people that could do all sorts of weird things. And he would try to challenge Moses and say, well, my people can do that. Well, those are wise men. That's who they looked to back in this day. But we find that Daniel and his cohorts here were far smarter than the people that he already had in his realm. And Daniel continued into the first year of King Cyrus. So Daniel is going to be over in this area. He's going to be in Babylon. And then after Persia overtakes Babylon, he's going to be over there 65 to 70 years, the Bible would tell us. He stays there. And he's in a lofty position there. He's a follower of God. He knows the history of God. He's committed to God. But yet he's thrown into a realm here where he's going to be overseeing people that are the scientists, the mathematicians, the astrologers, the people that provide counsel to the king. In Daniel, the 2nd chapter in verse 2, the Bible would say, then the king gave the command to call the magicians. He's got Nebuchadnezzar, calling the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to come tell the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Now, we know this story. We had this study earlier on at least one study where King Nebuchadnezzar has this crazy dream of this image that's made of gold, silver, bronze, clay, and iron, right? He doesn't know what it is. This small stone comes and shatters it, makes it go all to dust, and all of a sudden this stone turns into a great mountain that envelops the whole world, right? It's an eternal kingdom. Daniel is somebody who at the time appears to be unaware about this. He doesn't know about this, but Nebuchadnezzar has gone out and tried to get his wise men to interpret this. And when the wise men come to him and say, hey, tell us what the dream is, and then we'll interpret it. Nebuchadnezzar says, no, let's not do that. You tell me what the dream is, and you tell me the interpretation. And they say, we can't do that. That's going to take God to do that. We can't do that. We don't know what your dream is. And so Nebuchadnezzar says, well, then I'm going to kill all of you. And so when all the people were being rounded up, or all the wise men were being rounded up to be killed, they come to Daniel. Because Daniel is one of the wise men. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are also. So in Daniel, the 2nd chapter, in verse 12, the Bible says, for this reason the king was angry. He was angry because they couldn't tell him the dream. And they gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men. And they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. So Daniel's head was on the chopping block here, right? And when the captain of the guard comes to take Daniel away and kill him and kill his buddies, here his people that were drug off from Jerusalem, he says, wait, give me some time here. Give me some time. Let me figure this out. Let me consult with God and see if God can tell me what this dream was, and then I'll get back to you. Can you give me some time? And they do. They give him time. He goes and consults with God. God tells him what the dream is. God gives him the translation or the interpretation. So he's an interpreter of dreams, right? He's able to tell them that all these broken apart or torn apart metals are actually kingdoms that are going to come to nothing, right? But this stone that shattered them all to pieces is going to wind up being the eternal kingdom. Going to be the eternal kingdom. Now think about that for just a minute. Think about when Daniel does this interpreting. All the wise men are standing back and they say, wow, you saved our bacon. You're the greatest wise man that ever lived. We're not going to get killed because of you, Daniel. As I reflect back on this, I think he must have been quite a hero to these people. He was a legend. He saved them. He saved them from certain death from King Nebuchadnezzar. Think about that, because I think as time goes on here, from century to century, Daniel's name is going to be something that's talked about greatly by those that are considered wise men. He's a legend. He saves them. And because of this, Nebuchadnezzar recognizes this and says, then the king, or Nebuchadnezzar, promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts. And he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Daniel arose to a lofty position there. Basically wound up being the prime minister of Babylon and was over all the wise men. He had a strong influence and impact over this group of people. And we'll talk about that again here in a few moments. But, he was committed to God. He foretold the coming Messiah, and we're going to get into that here in a few moments too. So all of this had to be passed down to some degree to these wise men who may have been on the fringes of believing some crazy stuff, watching stars, practicing magic, but yet within that, they had the wisest of all men, being Daniel, being the one telling them a little bit about something special that's going to come down the pipe. There's a Greek historian named Herodotus. He would have been a Greek historian that would have been within about a century of the death of Daniel, I guess, right after the Persian Empire. I think the Persian Empire would have been collapsed about then. I think Greece probably was overtaking it about then. But he would have been a Greek historian. Well, this Greek historian, as you look back at some of the history here, he knew about the Magi. He chronicles that they were a tribe of people within the Medes and the Persian. We looked at the map earlier. It's over there on the other side of Babylon. He also says the Magi were hereditary, or were like a hereditary priesthood tribe, somewhat like the Levites in Israel. Now, they weren't Levites in the same way that they believed in the God that we believe in, but yet they did believe and function in some manner as a religious organization. It is believed that during the time of Babylon to the Roman empires, they maintained a place of prominence and significance in this region of the world. If you recall the map, and we'll show it here again, it's a region of the world that's about 700 to 1,000 miles from Jerusalem. And they had tremendous influence over the selection of future kings. And this is where it gets a little sketchy. I wasn't able to confirm this through various sources, but it says the kings must master the scientific and religious disciplines of the Magi and kings. Kings must be approved and crowned by the Magi. I don't know if that's true or not, but suffice it to say, they were in the king's court, and they counseled the king. Some historians would say they were kind of like our Senate, our House of Representatives, or maybe even our Supreme Court. They had a tremendous impact over what went on in that country. They could even go out and select the kings, and the kings had to go and be schooled in the law of the Medes and Persians. You hear that in Daniel, the 6th chapter, talking about that, or at least about the law of the Medes and Persians. They had to know about that, and they had to be accepted by the Magi before they would give him their blessing, basically. So some historians would say they were like king makers, right? That when the Magi would come along, or the wise men would come along, they would in some way coronate a king. They would be the ones that would give him their blessing. Like, he is definitely a king. He knows what he needs to know. And Daniel's position and influence over the Magi placed within them, the Magi, the knowledge of the one true God, and maybe a desire to look for that eternal king from that eternal kingdom. So think about that for a few minutes. I'm not trying to throw a whole lot at you because, well, I am, I guess. I tried to cram a lot of this in over the last 3 weeks, and some of it made my brain hurt because I'm not the brightest of all bulbs around. But Daniel, when he started in the 6th and 5th centuries, I think that would have been about the time he was around, him being head over the Magi that continued to remain in existence for several centuries, looks like up until at least the time of Christ, and there's some evidence in Acts that it continued after the time of Christ, he put within their head about this eternal kingdom that was going to come to pass. And then you go to Daniel, the 9th chapter, and Gabriel gives him the interpretation of a vision that seems to give an approximate time of when this Messiah or this king is going to come into being. And we look back and we try to say, well, is it 490 years, 70 times 70? At what point would it come into being? Well, these guys were looking at it and saying, When is it going to happen? We've got Daniel here. Daniel can receive all this interpretation from God. Daniel may be instructing them approximately when to start looking for this eternal kingdom. So with all the things that they believe, I can't help but think that this message was placed within their type of religion, if you will, to look for this king. Look for this king. Mike referenced when he gave me all of his slides, and Mike has a pretty thorough study. If you want a really detailed study, Mike Mitson's a guy. But in his study, he talks about this religion called Zoroastrianism. And that's a religion that would have come along about the same time that Darius, I believe in Daniel the 6th chapter, in Persia would have been around, right? Zoroaster, I think, was an Iranian prophet, if I'm not mistaken. He was from that part of the world, which was close to Persia. And it looks like Darius, from what I can tell, may have adopted that as a national religion. And that religion had within it a lot of the same aspects of the old law had within it. And it looked forward also to a time when there would be a Messiah. It believed in a heaven and hell. It didn't believe in the God of the universe that we believe in. But it believed in a God, right? So you have a big mixture of certain ideas that were put in these folks' head. But one of the things that seemed common is that at some point in time, to that religion and to the religion of Daniel, is that at some time there's going to be a Savior that's going to come on the scene. And I can't help but think Daniel said, now be watchful. And they extrapolated from Daniel 9 approximately when he's going to come. And maybe those magi, maybe those wise men sitting in Persia or modern day Iran were looking over there and said, hey, there's something happening in the cosmos here. There's something going on here. Let's saddle up and let's roll over to Jerusalem. But whatever it was very convincing. It had to be very convincing. And you know, it would be very convincing to know that in these days the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and it shall stand forever. Who wouldn't want to go and serve that king? Who wouldn't want to go and find that king? And then there's the Torah would have been in existence during the time of Daniel, I suspect. And Numbers, the 24th chapter, gives them some idea. This is from, I think, the 4th oracle of Balaam, or a prophecy that Balaam received. Balaam was, if you remember, was a prophet that was actually told or asked or hired by Balak, of the Moabite king, to curse the children of Israel. He wouldn't do it, but he kept receiving divine messages from God. And one of them was that a star shall come out of Jacob, a scepter shall rise out of Israel. A star shall come out of Jacob. It's another word for Israel. There's going to be a star come out of Israel. A scepter or a kingship will also rise out of the same place. Can you tie those together? Were they looking at these passages and saying, there's going to be a star and there's going to be a king associated with that star? Maybe. Maybe that's too far of a jump. I don't know. But there was something to convince them that something in the cosmos would drive them to the eternal king of the eternal kingdom. Let's talk about the time of their arrival. We're going to talk about the distance here in a minute. I thought I'd already talked about it by now, but I haven't. The time of their arrival. Now, this is where it gets kind of sketchy, and if you want a thorough history of this, I would direct you to somebody who knows a little more about it than me. But one thing happened in Luke the 2nd chapter. Luke the 2nd chapter is not a parallel passage, but it is a time of Jesus' birth, right around that time, right? And that's where you find the stories of the shepherds in the field. The angel comes to them and says, hey, something big's happening over here. You guys need to show up and go to Bethlehem. Something along those lines, paraphrase. They go over there. They go over there at night. Then it looks like there's a 40-day period between the time Jesus is born and the time in which he is presented at the temple, right? Presented to the Lord at the temple. And I say it's 40 days because, well, let's read the passage. Luke the 2nd chapter, verse 22, the Bible says, now when the days of her purification, talking about Mary, his mother, according to the law of Moses, were completed, they brought Jesus to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. As is written in the law of the Lord, every male who opens the womb shall be called holy to the Lord. That's found in Leviticus, the 12th chapter. That's what they're supposed to do. For a female, I think it's a little bit longer before they go over there, but for a male, they're supposed to bring him over there within what winds up being about 40 days. I think there's some math that's involved in that, but I think it's approximately 40 days. And to offer a sacrifice according to what is is said in the law of the Lord, a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. Now, what you're supposed to do, as you can see in the picture here, as it depicts, you see, they brought turtle doves, and obviously they brought birds, and the law provided in Leviticus, the 12th chapter, if you're poor, that you could bring something that poor people would bring, which are birds, to sacrifice, right? If you have money, you bring a lamb. You bring a lamb. Well, obviously, Mary and Joseph were poor. So what do they bring? They bring 2 birds they can buy for a very small amount of money to sacrifice as they present Jesus to the Lord. The law says this is supposed to happen within 40 days, right? Within 40 days. They show up there. They obviously show up, if you'll remember from the story, one of the wise men, or at least the wise men, bring Mary and Joseph and Jesus gold. Well, if they had gold, I suspect they would have went and purchased a lamb to sacrifice, but they didn't because they were poor. So this tells me that this event, and there's some other things that I won't get into, but this event right here tells me that the wise men had not arrived on the scene yet, which means we're at least a month and a half into Jesus' life, right? So they haven't shown up yet, because otherwise they would have offered the lamb. They would not have to use the provision that enabled them to offer birds as opposed to a lamb. They did not have money. So the time frame would be. Also, the time issue with after this is all over, there's an edict that comes down from Herod that he wants to kill all the children that are 2 years and under in the attempt to kill Jesus. So somewhere, but I don't know how this necessarily for sure how this happened, but it could be that the wise men didn't return and he waited for a period of time to hear from the wise men. But anyway, it's at least 40 days before the wise men arrive on the scene in Bethlehem, right? So it's at least 40 days. So they are not, as the pictures depict, they are not in the same scene, the nativity scene, which is popular this time of year. They're not in the same scene with the shepherds, right? But one thing I don't want to do, I don't want to poo-poo that scene because I think that scene is significant, even though it's not historically correct. And we'll get into that here in a few moments. Who is Herod? Herod the king. You know, Herod is somebody that I believe his father would have been ruler over Jerusalem. He was an Edomite. So he wasn't he was, as David talked about Isaac this morning, he had twin children, Jacob and Esau. He'd be from the side of the family from Esau, right? He would have been Edomite. I think Edom would have been south of that whole area of Jerusalem and Judea. Their area or their landmass would have been. So he wasn't a true Jew, but it looks like to some degree he tried to, at least for the people's sake, show that he was a Jew. You know, he tried to rebuild this temple. We talked about the temple a few days ago. He tried to rebuild it and make it look wonderful and beautiful, and he did, Herod's temple. But he was trying to appease the Jews to some degree. So Herod was obviously in the palace in Jerusalem. Where do wise men go when they hear there's a king born in Jerusalem? It would stand to reason they would go to the king's palace, right? They encountered Herod there. That's where you would go. And I'm sure they would show up and they said, well, this isn't the right king. This isn't the guy. Surely this guy's not going to rule over eternal kingdom. And he's not just born, he's an older man. He would have ruled from about 37 BC to 4 BC, which would be about the time of Jesus' birth, right around that area. And he was placed in power by Rome. He was given the title by an emperor, the king of Judea. And also, some accounts said that he was told to be called the king of the Jews, right? So when the wise men show up and they say, we want to know who's born king of the Jews, did Herod raise his hand? Well, I'm not born, but I'm the king of the Jews. You know, he had some title envy here, didn't he? People show up and he's going to take his title from him, so he was concerned. And the Bible says that he was troubled. He was troubled. He was agitated. He was stirred up. He was made restless. You know, why was that? Why was he troubled? Well, I think part of the troubling aspect of this is I think there's a lot, in all probability, there's many more than 3 wise men or magi that are showing up. I think there's a big contingent of people that are arriving. One reason is because the Roman Empire is somewhat at odds with this part of the world that we're looking at, where the Medes and the Persians are at, right? And so for them just to show up, 3 of them, I think is somewhat unrealistic. I think they had a whole entourage of people. Whether they had soldiers or not, I don't know. But I think it's concerning for Herod. Some historical accounts will say that Herod's army, or the people that would defend the city, were gone at this time, so it would have troubled him. I don't know if that's true or not. But it troubles him when people come and looking around saying, there's a king here. We need to find out who it is. And, well, he's the king. You don't need to look any farther. Stop here. I'm the guy. No, we need to pass on through and find somebody else. You're not the guy. You're not the guy. And so it troubled them. And historical accounts tell us that Herod was Herod the Great. He wasn't Herod the Gentle. He wasn't Herod to come sit on my lap. He was Herod the Great. And when you're great, people shake when they see you, right? People die when you walk through or past him. And that's what happened to him. He killed many members of his own family, killed several of his own children because he didn't want them to take the throne. These people are paranoid half the time. So he was a fearful guy to get riled up. And so the people, I think Jerusalem was a little bit troubled too. Maybe because Herod's getting troubled. They didn't seem to be troubled by the fact that they missed it. That doesn't seem to be what's troubling them. It doesn't seem to be troubling them. They missed the king being born right down the road. Bethlehem's only 6 miles from Jerusalem. It's right over there. It's like going to Moore. It's right there by them. And they don't know. You have to have people that have to come 800 to 1,000 miles to show up and say, something spectacular is happening somewhere here. We don't know where it's at. So Herod has to go talk to the chief priests and scribes. So we know he had some connection to the Jews. They said, where's this guy? Where's this going to happen at? They tell him it's going to happen in Bethlehem. Wouldn't they make the trip over there? Were they completely uninterested and unwilling to make the track? That was going to be their Messiah. That was going to be their king. But yet the locals acted as though they could care less. So they have to have people that trample all the way, halfway across the world to show up and say, hey, something spectacular is going on here. We want to know where this king is. That may have troubled them too, that they weren't on top of their game. And Herod hears, after they had came to him, he gathers, as I just mentioned, the chief priests and scribes together, and he says, where is this child going to be born at? They're seeking a child. Where is he going to be born at? And they say, well, Bethlehem. They look back to Micah. They know the Old Testament scriptures. They say, well, it's going to be born in Bethlehem. The child's going to be born in Bethlehem. And another verse right at the end of that passage, if you read it where it says, then Herod, I didn't put a verse up there, it says, then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star had appeared, which makes me think that he had never seen the star. Whatever was happening in the cosmos, he didn't know. He had to go ask the people who had seen it, who had packed up all their animals and traversed, 1,000 miles. He had asked them when the star appeared. So he hadn't seen the star. He didn't know about the star. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, just like the scribes and Pharisees told him where they should go. And he said, of course, then he says something that is very insincere, right? He says, go search him out and find out where he's at, and then come back and tell me. We know the wise men don't comply with that because we know that Herod's intentions are to kill the king. What do? Matthew, the 2nd chapter, verse 9, continue with the story. It says, when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east, they had seen rising, went before them. So the star they had seen, they were coming from the east. They were in the east. They went to the west to go to Jerusalem. So when they had seen the star in the east, they looked that way, even though Jerusalem's over here. But when they'd seen the star in the east, they decided, hey, we've got to go to Jerusalem. Now they wind up being in Jerusalem. All of a sudden, the king says, what's going to happen in Bethlehem? Then what happens? That star appears again, doesn't it? The star that they had seen, all of a sudden, now how this happens, I don't know. This is only coming from God. He's the only one that can do this. The star which they had seen in the east went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. Yeah, they would have rejoiced. They didn't want to travel all this way, and all of a sudden, man, this king doesn't know a whole lot. He tells us to go to this city. We don't really know where to go. And all of a sudden, the star that they had seen that sent them on this journey that lasted maybe a couple of months, it showed up again. Hallelujah. We're going to find that king after all. We're going to find that king after all. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. They didn't worship them. They worshipped him. They were exceedingly joyful to see the star, and then they knew exactly what to do when they saw the Messiah. Even wrapped in whatever he was wrapped in at that point, he'd been maybe a little bit older. How he was, a young, maybe an infant, maybe a toddler, whatever he was at that point, they fell down and worshiped him. The picture there, that's the nativity scene. Now, there's a lot of paintings of that. Is it historically accurate? Probably not. Probably not. But you see shepherds in there, right? Those people holding the canes. I guess that's what you heard shepherds with. And then you see these regally dressed men. Those are the ones that are supposedly the wise men. You know, in the 8th century, they named those people Balthasar, Melchior, and Gaspar. There's legend associated with those guys, right? So they had to name them at some point in time. That's obviously not their names, I wouldn't think. But they named them well after the fact. But the picture's not historically accurate. But you know what? The message is true then, it's true today. The message is this. There's the king of the world born, a human. And you've got the lowest of low, the poorest of poor, that come and bow down before that baby. Because he is a king of that eternal kingdom. And then you've got the wealthiest of wealthy, the most adorned people, the most regal outfit with crowns on their head, walking in there, and you know what they're doing? They're doing the same thing. Amen. They're doing the same thing that the poorest of poor, because it doesn't matter what class of people or where you come from. You still, when you see the Messiah, you still bow down and worship him. Amen. It's true today. It was definitely true back then. You know, after they worshiped him, it says they presented him gifts, right? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. You know, I suspect that's how the Christmas season of giving has come into being, right? Several centuries ago, some child was being read this story, and he said, hey, I got an idea. Why can't we all do this, right? And so I think that may have started from that, the giving of gifts, right? But as the song we sang a minute ago, they gave very important treasures, right? They opened up the vault, so to speak, as it relates to the first gift, gold. What is gold? It's a gift fit for a king, right? You read about the temples in the king's palaces. We just studied 2 Kings. Well, they're very ornate and covered in gold. Things that are in the temple are covered in the gold. The Ark of the Covenant, everything's covered in gold. Later, and it's the most discussed precious metal in the Bible, right? Because it's the most precious. That is something that's befitting a king. And they wanted to give their best treasure here. As Anderson sang in the song, says, gold I bring to crown him again, king forever, ceasing never, over us all to reign. Let's sing that song more often. What else they give them? They give them a couple of spices or perfumes that we don't know anything about. I try to buy some these oils that people put in diffusers. I forget what those special oils are called. Couldn't find it cheap enough, so I didn't buy frankincense and myrrh. I wanted to have some of that here, but they do sell frankincense and myrrh. Frankincense, back in the day, and you can look in the Old Testament, often, I shouldn't say oftentimes, occasionally they would mingle frankincense with sacrifices that were offered up to God. And it was like a perfume. It was some type of sap from a tree. And the song as we sing here, it says, incense owns a deity nigh. Prayer and praising, all in raising, worship him, God on high. What does it symbolize? Now, I don't know if it necessarily symbolized or meant that back then, but you can take it to mean today that there's a deity nigh. They're offering their gifts. They're giving him their gold as a king. He's a deity. He's God in the flesh. We should offer up sacrifices up unto him. Frankincense is a perfect gift to give him. They knew he was God of the world, King of the universe. Frankincense, myrrh. It's to myrrh. Myrrh is also some type of perfume. If you remember in the New Testament account of Nicodemus going to prepare the body of Jesus, one of the spices that he brought with him was myrrh. He was going to prepare the body. And that tells how Jesus is going to end until he is resurrected. This myrrh is used to preserve dead bodies. Breathes a life of gathering gloom, sorrowing, sighing, bleeding, dying, sealed in a stone-cold tomb. As the song says, what better gifts to give him and signify a king, God in the flesh, and one that would die for the sins of the world. Perfect gifts. Can't help but think that they knew enough about that too to offer these gifts. Don't know that for a fact, but so today, as I haven't looked at my clock in a while, oh my, I'm going real long. This is about over, I promise. What happens after they found Jesus? What happens after they fell down and worshiped him? What happened to them after they offered their gifts to Jesus? Well, one thing they didn't want to do, they didn't want to go back to the faux king of the Jews. They didn't want to go back to Herod. Then they were divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod. They departed for their own country another way. You know, there's a lot of different paths that we take to get to Jesus, don't we? A lot of us here today have taken maybe some long, hard journeys to get to Jesus. I don't think I did. I got up out of my bedroom and walked into my living room. And I had my parents there. My path to Jesus wasn't that difficult. Some people travel all sorts of highs and lows and craziness to get to that baby Jesus, don't they? Just like the wise men. Traveled for days and days and days and loads up all sorts of hardships and all sorts of misdirection, doing the wrong thing. Next thing you know, they wind up there. But you know what happens once you come and get there to the baby Jesus? It doesn't matter how you got there. It doesn't matter. The thing that only matters is that you leave all that junk behind and you're set out on a new path, right? Their path changed. Our path has to change. Man's path has to change once you encounter the baby Jesus. Ephesians 4:20 tells us that, however, is not the way of life you've learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by the deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitudes of your mind, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. That's the quest. That's the goal. Forgetting what is behind and looking forward to what's in front of us. Our paths change when you encounter Jesus. Just like their path changed, our path can change and should change. What example can we take from this as we close? What can we apply today to our lives? One of the things the wise men did, they invested their time, a great amount of it. They journeyed for days. They journeyed by, the pictures would show camels, maybe horses, donkeys, maybe on their feet. But they were committed to be a part of that kingdom. They were committed to see that king. It's a perfect example for us today. The commitment to pay the price. You know what else they did? They may have had some strange talents, right? They may be able to look at the stars and see things that I can't see. They may be able to do things that, maybe in my mind, it would be almost like magic. But for whatever talent they had, they utilized it in a way that brought them to Jesus and that benefited themselves, right? But in the end, it's going to benefit all of mankind once we start detecting Jesus and showing that out in our lives. A lot of times we value talents, and we shouldn't be this way, but we value talents of being able to sing beautifully or promote Jesus from a place like I'm standing today. Whether I can do it well or not, I don't know. But I can stand up here and do this. There are so many other talents to bring to the feet of Jesus. There are so many other talents that benefit His kingdom and lead people to Christ. We've got things going on right now in this congregation where people are using their talents to the glory of God. And you know what? Most of us don't even know about it. But there's big things happening as a result of the talents they have within them. They're utilizing for the benefit of the kingdom. Bring your talent. If you can't find a way to utilize your talent, come talk to this guy right over here. I keep pointing him out. I have a lot of, if you can't see on camera, I'm talking about Mike. But I shouldn't give him so much praise. But people have ways of finding usage for your talents. If you feel like your talents are being unused, tell us. We can find ways to use your talents. You have a talent, you can use it for the cause of Christ. Also, they offer their best gifts. The money they had, the treasures they brought, they didn't bring secondary gifts, they brought gold. And you know what? When they saw him, they fell down and they worshiped him. They fell down and they worshiped him. They brought their testimony. They confessed him. They didn't pull back. There wasn't any restraint. They were happy. And they glorified God. Lessons from the wise men. I saw this quote, and we'll close with this. They arrived with their treasures at hand, but did they leave Bethlehem with the treasure of Christ in their hearts? That's the question today. We often give a whole lot to Jesus. We need to make sure and receive the blessing of Jesus within our heart that allows us to change, allows us to be his servants, allows us to put him in place of any king that we have in our lives. He needs to be that king. The lesson is yours this morning. I know it went long. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I appreciate the assignment. I'm hopeful that, I know I got a lot out of it. Maybe at the very least it inspired some questions that you may have, and it may involve some deeper study on your part. But it's a good story. This time of year when we see the opportunity, and there are opportunities to discuss the birth of Jesus, I'm not a big fan of saying, you got it all wrong. This isn't really how it worked. I'm a big fan of showing what that picture depicts, right? Coming to the foot of Jesus and worshiping him. It happened 2,000 years ago, and it needs to continue to happen today. And that's the message that we can get from these pictures and the nativity scene and things such as that. And bring all glory to God. This morning, if you're not a Christian and you'd like to be one, we can make that happen today. You can be buried with your Lord and Savior in baptism. You can be brought out of that water to walk in newness of life. And your old path is gone and your new path has begun. If you're a person that needs the prayers of this congregation, obviously you can petition God at any time. We can also, though. We can be aware of your concerns, your issues that we need to be concerned of, and we can pray for you as a congregation. If those are things that you desire this morning, either one of those, please make those wishes known and come sit up on the front pew as we stand and we sing the song of invitation.